you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned in my opening statement, there are a number of troubling signs that the Fed is attempting to get in the business of environmental policy. That, as you know, Mr. Quarles, the Fed's regulatory role is to ensure the safety and soundness of the financial institutions that it regulates. Let me ask you a simple question. I think this is probably a yes or no answer. Are you aware of any banks that failed due to Superstorm Sandy, Hurricane Andrew, the California wildfires, or any other recent weather event?
No, I'm not.
I'm not either, and you can go back quite a ways, and it's hard to find. We haven't been able to find it yet. So it's pretty clear to me that neither the warming of the Earth's temperature, which is occurring, nor severe weather events pose a threat to the stability of the financial system. As Larry Summers said last week, there seems to be an overemphasis of certain risks like climate change by central banks. And here's a quote attributable to Larry Summers. He said, and I quote, "In order to be relevant to something that's on political leaders' minds." So my concern is this will ultimately, end quote. My concern is this will ultimately come at the expense of monitoring the real risks, and the Fed shouldn't be wasting time and resources on what is ultimately a political effort. Let me move on to money market reforms. This past March, you said that the Financial Stability Board will be outlining proposals for further money market reforms. You made a reference to that in your opening statement. Presumably, the impetus for these reforms is market disruptions we saw last spring. Of course, as you know, many markets were disrupted. Even the Treasury market was disrupted. The repo market was disrupted. And it seems very likely that a factor that made things worse for money market funds was the presence of a 30% liquid asset threshold that triggered these mandatory fees and gates. These regulations, of course, were meant to prevent runs, but ultimately it looks as though they had the opposite of their intended effect. My question for you is, if we're going to propose any new regulation, shouldn't we first make sure we fix any flaws in the existing ones?
I do think that the existing regulatory framework has to be something that's looked at, and we are including that in the overall broad review of the issues that led to the money market fund issues last March.
All right, good. As you know, this week I sent letters to 3 regional Fed banks inquiring about what I see as a troubling veer into social policy topics. In particular, some of the banks have appeared to engage in an activity that I think can fairly be characterized as advocacy with respect to systemic racism, which is a very controversial idea that somehow American laws and institutions, including, I presume, the Federal Reserve, are inherently racist in their design. A big concern here is whether the Fed banks are operating well beyond their statutory mandate. Would you agree that if regional Fed banks engage in partisan advocacy, masquerading as research, that advocacy would harm the Fed's credibility and its trustworthiness as an independent and nonpartisan entity?
So let me say 2 things with response to that. The short answer is yes. We have at the Fed, we have a narrow mandate. We've been given significant autonomy to pursue that mandate, and I think that that's important. But that means that we should stay within the lanes of that narrow mandate. I do think that within that mandate, research into breaking down the effects of some of the large aggregate economic numbers, whether by geography, whether by different demographies, can be appropriate, but it should not cross the line into advocacy. It should be analysis.
Thanks. Last question. As you know, the Fed's QE has put capital pressure on banks, and you addressed that with a temporary measure, and I know you've indicated that there will be something more coming through. Do you anticipate more permanent changes in the regulatory regime to recognize this capital pressure?
Well, we're looking at that now. I think our best estimate is that as the level of reserves in the system grows over the course of this year, we will see some of that pressure. There are a variety of ways one could address it. We're exploring them all. We have not decided whether it will ultimately be necessary or what path to propose, but we're looking closely at it.
I hope you will. I'll finish up, Mr. Chairman, but Mr. Quarles, I do think the Fed is imposing this through its unusual activity, which is continuing inexplicably to me. So I do hope you'll look to remediate that. Thank you.